Good evening, and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Brandis Friedman. Nick Blumberg has the evening off. Following a mass shooting over Father's Day weekend, Mayor Brandon Johnson signs an executive order to create a new Office of Gun Violence Reduction.
We will be able to deliver resources and services quickly and strategically and effectively to the communities that need them the most.
Another candidate jumps in the race to be the next Chicago mayor. Former Housing Authority Chair Matt Brewer.
I've had a front row seat to see the dysfunction coming out of City Hall. In fact, I'm running for mayor because for too long we've been presented with a false choice about Chicago's future.
Meanwhile, Governor J.B. Pritzker prevents Illinois patients' medical records from being shared with other states, signing the law on the anniversary of the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision that struck down the federal constitutional right to abortion.
Healthcare records exist to treat patients, not surveil and punish them.
A Bears stadium in Illinois may still be on the table as lawmakers devise new plans.
The president, I believe, is going to sign that bill. He delayed it. Keep the faith. We're going to get it all done.
President Donald Trump withholds his approval of a bipartisan bill meant to lower housing costs for Americans. Plus, the Cook County Sheriff takes on crime on public transit, and a Supreme Court ruling hands more power to the president on immigration. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Olivia Olander of the Chicago Tribune, Simone Alicea of CityCast Chicago, Francia Garcia Hernandez of Block Club Chicago, and Violet Miller of the Chicago Sun-Times. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So, as we heard, Mayor Johnson signed this executive order just yesterday to create a new Office of Gun Violence Reduction. This comes, Violet, after this mass shooting that happened last weekend. But at the same time, we know that crime, Chicago's experiencing this historic decline in gun violence as of last year. Tell us what this office would do, and how is it different from the already existing Office of Community Safety?
Yeah, just to set up the context you kind of mentioned there, last year Chicago saw the fewest homicides since 1965, so a pretty landmark year in terms of public safety. But in terms of this office, we don't have a ton of specifics in terms of the actual bill, because right now this is being created through executive order. The full push is to get this created through the city council. And so because it's created through executive order, the next mayor could repeal it, could pull this back. So, there's a number of issues, obviously, in terms of durability there. They're looking for $100 million for the budget, which is about 3% of what Chicago expects to spend on public safety this year. For context, CPD gets $2.1 billion, or 67% of the $3.1 billion for this year's budget. So really a kind of minuscule fraction of that, but it's supposed to take up existing public safety funds, which is interesting. I think the other notable point about it is that they have procurement power, or they're aiming to have procurement power, rather, which would allow them to contract people like violence interrupters, other groups the city has worked with to reduce gun violence, because that's what the Johnson administration and others in the public safety sphere are crediting with this decline in crime, in addition to some changes in policing tactics, like relying on detectives more than beat cops, things like that.
Naturally, though, he's got some critics in the city council. What are they saying?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of folks are, take issue with the procurement clause specifically because they worry that it could be ripe for abuse, right? There's, potentially an office that could then go out on its own, do these procurements, create these contracts with potentially a little less oversight than they might have if they were just in the state they are now. And so, a lot of folks just worried about either spending or, again, the potential for abuse here.
Right, because I think some older folks are concerned that, or they would rather increase the police budget, which might not exactly square with those anti-violence activists and the community interventionists that we hear about.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's been a mixture of things. There's no silver bullet in this situation. I think anybody claiming to have a silver bullet for public safety is just, frankly lying.
Right.
That we know that's not true. Right. So it's a combination of things, and the idea for Johnson's administration is to follow New York, Baltimore, some of these other cities that have similar offices that coordinate these different programs. It's supposed to pull in housing for, housing help for survivors, re-entry for those who have served their time, all of these different services to try and create a unified front on public safety. But again, a lot of the details remain yet to be seen.
Olivia, also this week, CTA riders noticing some more law enforcement on the commute. What's happening there?
Yeah, pretty interesting. So the big transit bill that we were talking about a few months ago that aims to sort of remake how transit is organized in the Chicago area, a big part of it was increasing funding for law enforcement. A bunch of the funding went to law enforcement and to safety on the trains. This was raise some eyebrows with some advocates who just want, more service. But this was a development that folks saw a little bit of this week with the sheriff, Tom Dart, saying that he favored a designated agency for this. Right now, it's a combination of agencies. So this is pretty interesting. A lot of reporters went on ride-alongs today. I was not one of them, but my colleague Talia Soglin did, and I believe saw them handcuff someone and then release them who had been vaping on a platform. So pretty interesting.
That, I gotta say, when I saw those stories and like the things that officers were handcuffing for, I was a little surprised. Vaping, fare evasion, right? A big thing, just getting on the train without having paid. And certainly I think any of us who has ridden the CTA can agree that like smoking, even like loud noise, can be a big nuisance. But like the idea of cuffing someone and leading them off the train for that kind of thing did feel a bit extreme to me, just as a viewer. But then I guess like what's the other option? Like how else are you enforcing the rule?
Well, and I mean, so the sheriff's office, they'd been out there doing the whole circuit with all of our colleagues across the city, and I actually did get one of those ride-alongs earlier this week. That story is forthcoming to our viewers because I know you're all wondering. But I think the explanation that the sheriff's office has is that we're going to start with these these smaller items first: the vaping, the fare evasion, first of all, because that's a financial loss for the transit system. But I think they think that also leads to other things, right? Like, so first it was a fare evasion or smoking or vaping on the train, and maybe we'd, take his license and run him. Oh, turns out he's got a warrant. Or it turns out like they found him for something else, right? So I think their thinking is, we start with sort of these quality of life, quality of ride things, and that will also lead to, this is what they're telling us, right? And that will also
and you have
lead
to imagine, though, it's also
crime.
It's also about the theater of it, though, right? About if you have a bunch of video of sheriff's deputies out there saying you can't smoke on the train, does it make the people watching, potential riders of the CTA, to get ridership up on the CTA and to get fares up on the CTA, more likely to be like, oh, actually, I think the train's safer than I thought it was. Maybe I'll go ride the train.
Right. We've even seen in some cases where, we've had these really public shows of force. I mean, you look no further than DC, look no further than our own city with, the federal, occupation that's been going on in multiple cities across the country. I mean, a lot of these things, especially when you're bringing in law enforcement agents that aren't of the local area, they don't know the folks, they don't know the people that are, there consistently, who might just need help or be having an episode. We can see that cause other issues and balloon out into further problems. I guess I'm curious to see what the actual impact will be.
Right, I'm curious to see what they end up coming up with, right, at the end of, or whenever a decision has to be made on a standalone law enforcement unified police force for transit, or something else, whatever that might be. So Governor Pritzker, he has also said, Olivia, that his office is still in ongoing negotiations with the Bears. Oh, the Bears. The team has been considering two bills that each pass one chamber of the General Assembly this spring. Neither pass also the other, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. So what is in it for the Bears with each bill?
Well, with one bill, the bill that passed through the House, this is the so-called mega projects legislation, opens the door for a payment in lieu of taxes program pilot program for a potential stadium, and that was sort of aimed at Arlington Heights, building a stadium there. Another bill that passed in the late hours of the Illinois Senate toward the end of session would have opened the door essentially to a potential stadium in Chicago, kind of a question mark, but it didn't end up quite mattering because it didn't pass through both chambers anyway. What we heard this week from the governor is Bears are looking at both of those bills, and he also said that his office is still in contact with them. He made a point to say that this week, but those are really the only updates. I think we're still waiting to see what lawmakers and the Bears come up with. Right,
yeah, we heard from Republican Dan Ugasti this week saying that he's got an idea, he's got a bill, but he hasn't really talked to the Bears about it yet. And so, and it sounds like there would have to be some agreement between the state and the Bears before the governor is going to call everybody back to Springfield to sign and vote on something.
Yeah.
Do you think the General Assembly would head into, actually, Simone, I'm going to come to you on this one. You think the General Assembly is going to head into special session over this? What do you think?
If those, behind the scenes negotiations go well, certainly I think they will, right? I think here's the thing. No one wants to be the governor or the lawmaker who lost the Bears to Indiana. Right? No one wants to be that. I think Springfield is highly motivated to keep the Bears, at the very least, in Illinois. That said, there is really little, there's like zero appetite among the public on big tax incentives for sports teams. No one wants to do anymore. We're still paying off Soldier Field. And so, the Bears, I'm using theater again because it's all about who's playing who and who's telling what story and what story sounds better. The Bears are like, oh, our board voted. We're going to go to Hammond. Here's the site. It's going to be great. Sorry, Illinois, you didn't get there fast enough. You didn't hit our deadline. And Illinois is like, no, but we can come back. But it'll be a special session just for you. And, at this point, I think Chicago's more or less out of the running unless there is some secret third plan that Brandon Johnson's team is working on with Pritzker and everybody else. And the Bears own the property in Arlington Heights. They own it.
Right. Okay. So, Francie, I'm going to get you in here because they own that property in Arlington Heights, but they're like, nope, going to go to Hammond. Whoa, you tore down a whole racetrack to go to Arlington Heights.
That's more of my own view. It's like it's a power play because they don't want to go to Indiana, or they would have gone. Like Indiana offered them a sweet deal. It was like packaged. It had a bow on it, and they're still like, well, they say they're going, but they're not making any moves. They still have the property in Arlington Heights, and they're still talking to state officials. At the end of the day, the fans are in Chicago and the state, and I think they know that. Obviously, they know there's no appetite for tax incentives, so they're trying to put some pressure and say, we're going to go to Indiana. But they've had years or months, or I don't know how long it's been
Feels like it's been years.
Go.
and they still have plenty of time on their lease at Soldier Field, by the way.
So they could have gone. They haven't gone. You're just saying, it's kind of like the leaving.
The bluffing.
Yeah, the boyfriend that threatens to leave but doesn't leave.
That's exactly what it's like. That's exactly what it's like.
Okay, so we know that Pritzker, he also signed a bill this week that further bolstered Illinois as a haven for abortion care. Olivia, what would this new law do?
Yeah, this has been an emerging story over the last 4 years since Roe was overturned with the Dobbs decision, and the anniversary of that, as I think was mentioned a few minutes ago, just passed. So the governor sort of commemorated that by signing this bill that basically doesn't allow sharing of records related to abortion across state lines. It affects companies like the ones that make my chart. It says you have to segregate that information and then not share it across state lines. That's the idea. It's to not lead to some of these situations that I think lawmakers are concerned about women being somehow punished or retaliated against if they they come to Illinois to get an abortion and then go back to their home state.
The governor also signed a handful of consumer protection bills yesterday. One of them tackles junk fees. One will protect ticket buyers, so hopefully that helps Taylor Swift fans. And Beyonce fans. And it's sort of in line, though, with a message that Pritzker and other Democrats are hitting on for November. Of course, that is affordability. How else are they driving this message, Olivia? Does it seem like they're going to have an impact on voters?
Yeah, I mean, these laws don't go into place until, I think, next year, so voters might not see it right away. But the idea here is you can't put a mandatory fee on something at the very last step at checkout that you have to pay in order to buy the item, because that should be rolled into the price of the item, the lawmakers say. So this is something that folks might notice, like maybe in the coming months on their bills. And the governor's office, I think, is trying to, and lawmakers are trying to show that they are looking at the areas of affordability that people really notice. Concert tickets was another thing that they signed a bill on this week. Ban on bots buying concert tickets and jacking up those prices was the concern. So, yeah, they're trying to reach voters on the affordability issue. We'll see what voters think.
Yeah. Francia, this week, 2 independent candidates might get knocked off the ballot in the race to replace U.S. Representative Jesus Chuy Garcia. What's happening? Why are they having to fight for their spots on the ballot?
Well, this comes after a very controversial maneuver by Representative Chuy Garcia, who at the very last minute withdrew his petitions and made a clear way for his chief of staff, Patty Garcia, to be on the ballot. She was the only candidate in the primary, so they're like voters say there was no primary there. They're like an independent and a Republican candidate on the ballot, but this is a safe Democratic district, so it doesn't really matter. 4 independent candidates launched their bids after this maneuver. 3 of them are still on the race as of now, but 2 of them, the 2 Latino candidates, could be knocked off. And, when I explain this, we have to get into the specifics of how independents can get on the ballot to begin with. And this is very complicated for voters and really not uniform. But essentially, independent candidates have to gather a number of signatures to get on the ballot to even get a chance. In the case of the 4th district, that's more than 10,000, but yeah, at least 10,000, no more than 17,000, just to get on the ballot. And then there's an objection process. So 3 people, the same 3 people, objected to thousands of signatures for Mayra Macias and Byron Sixto Lopez. The state board of elections reviewed them and said, okay, these many are valid and these many are not. So Byron had to prove that over 1,000 are still valid. Mayra had to prove that about 486 are still valid. They have a very short timeline to do that. That's like for 3 days for Mayra Macias. Byron had a little bit more time because he got an extension. And the process is not easy. You have to go to each voter who signed that petition, get a notary, and get evidence that that is real. So they were both working really hard until the last minute to get that evidence. But as of Wednesday, 5 p.m. when they had the deadline, they were still short. Mayra was short of about 100. Byron Sixto Lopez was short about 225 or something.
Okay. Also, in another election battle, Simone, the Chicago Housing Authority's Matthew Brewer entering the mayor's race. What do we know about why he's jumping in?
Well, he says he's jumping in because he produces a very slick video, right? I'm announcing my candidacy. Yes, we need something new. But he also came out swinging against incumbent Mayor Brandon Johnson, and who we assume is going to be running for re-election.
He hasn't said yet.
He hasn't technically announced yet, so who knows? But he has accused Johnson of, I believe the quote was, alienating and demonizing Chicago's business community. But he and Johnson also had a pretty personal beef over who was supposed to lead the Chicago Housing Authority, right? Johnson wanted to install former Alderman Walter Burnett as CEO of CHA. The board that Brewer led didn't want to do that, and there was an issue with housing and urban development as well. They ended up appointing Keith Pettigrew, and Johnson was so upset that he tried to remove Brewer from his position as board chair and also as operating chair, and that actually never happened. So this beef kind of goes back to something very specific, just beyond some of the other candidates who have jumped in to say, hey, I don't think Johnson's doing a good job. It seems to be a bit more. Ironically, he says it's not personal, but it does seem to be a bit more personal.
Yeah. Okay, and then there's also U.S. Representative Mike Quigley. We're expected to hear from him tomorrow that he is going to hop in the race as well, making a run for it. What are you looking for in this upcoming mayoral race? Simone, you first.
What am I looking for? Again, I'm looking for someone who can frame a platform outside of I'm not Brandon Johnson, I think is the thing that I am the most interested in. Quigley, to your point, this is his official announcement, but he has stated publicly several times he intends to. He has a website, that has a platform on mostly budget stuff, and he's looking for efficiencies and trying to.
Budget stuff, it's a technical term we use.
Yeah, Chicago should spend less money.
That's a good one. I've heard of that. Yeah.
Huzzah. But I think that for me is the thing. So many of these candidates who have come out, and I mean, yes, they have their unique. I mean, Susana Mendoza, Illinois comptroller, right, and her social media is almost legendary at this point, right? What she's been doing, but I wouldn't say that any of them has outlined policy-wise a platform that feels unique other than to say that I think Johnson's doing a bad job.
I will say an early gaffe from the Mendoza campaign was, unintended. Not that they could have predicted this, but they filmed their, campaign announcement video in an Albany Park grocery store, which the day prior had a man tased and detained by ICE outside of it after they crashed into a civilian vehicle. CPD then closed the investigation of the crash. But she has previously called for migrants to be deported to CCOT, which is a place that folks have been tortured. Really, really horrible things happening there, and so I imagine those comments will come back to haunt her.
She makes an announcement in Little Village too.
Yeah.
After that, right? It's a bit confusing.
After some of that, Violet, the Federal Trade Commission is suing a Chicago area transgender health group. What's the update on that?
Yeah, so this is the latest Trump administration attack on gender-affirming care, specifically for youth, but they've been attacking, this care for adults as well in many of their actions. But the FTC was initially investigating WPATH, as the group is known, East Dundee based, saying that they were giving fraudulent guidance for healthcare and profiting off of it. This is very similar to the investigation that they were running against WPATH that was just blocked by a federal court judge. They've also been investigating multiple major, healthcare organizations, all related to this gender-affirming care. WPATH came out swinging, very much refuting what the government is saying here, saying that, this is pure and simple retaliation, that they were going to their kind of go-to state's attorneys to carry this lawsuit forward. And it just seems, again, in the latest line of Trump administration attacks, they've tried executive orders, they've tried DOJ subpoenas for youth healthcare information, they've tried lawsuits, they've tried any number of things, even the FBI getting involved in some of these situations. And so this just seems to be the last kind of attempt to make something stick.
Right, okay. And so another way that the Trump administration has repeatedly attacked the people of Chicago, of course, is with immigration efforts, because the Illinois Accountability Commission, which is the state's effort to investigate federal immigration enforcement alleged misconduct, they say that they've noticed an uptick in ICE arrests. Francia, you of course cover Little Village and Pilsen, and we know that those neighborhoods, those communities faced heightened enforcement during the Midway Blitz. What are you hearing from neighbors there?
Arrests continue in the neighborhoods, but mostly in courthouses in violation of a state law and a court order that was passed here in Illinois to ban civil immigration arrests from happening at courthouses. Advocates and lawmakers say, when people show up to court, whether that's for a traffic ticket or a domestic violence case, they should be able to do it safely and not worry about immigration agents taking them. So those have been target areas of arrests. People going to ICE check-ins or with pending asylum applications or some sort of pending immigration case who appear before authorities are also being detained often and taken into custody, moved to detention centers, in some cases deported very quickly. So that obviously leaves a lot of people frustrated, scared, and anxious. This also comes at a time when, policy at the federal level is changing, and the Supreme Court has ruled on immigration on several issues that will make many more immigrants at risk of potential deportation, and that could continue to change as, the president now seems to have the ability to terminate temporary protected status and protections for people who came here legally and had status.
Right, yeah, update us on that, because like you just mentioned, it was a decision that came down yesterday that allowed the administration to end the temporary protected status of particularly Haitians and Syrians. I mean, is there more to come, right? Could more folks lose their protected status?
That is a concern among advocates, immigration lawyers and experts. They worry that because the president ruled, or the Department of Homeland Security ruled, that this status was meant to be temporary and that people can return to their countries of origin, that they could do the same for a number of other countries. TPS is typically given to countries who are facing a crisis, whether that's environmental or humanitarian, or a war, civil war, or other. So people might not be able to safely return. I know there are reports of people from Haiti, 3 women from Haiti who were deported in previous months and were found beheaded in a river in Haiti. So clearly conditions were not safe for them to return. Nevertheless, the administration is saying we think it is, and you should go back. That ends all of their protections, their work permits, anything that they had, no matter how long these people have been in the United States.
Okay, and of course, we're still waiting on the Supreme Court to make its ruling on the birthright citizenship case. All eyes on the Supreme Court this time of year. That's where we'll have to leave it. Thanks to my panel for joining us, Olivia Olander, Simone Alicea, and Francia Garcia Hernandez, and Violet Miller. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Friday night. Check out our website for our Chicago Summer Festival Guide. From street fests and art shows to outdoor concerts and cultural celebrations, we have got you covered. It is all at WTTW.com/festivals. Now for the Weekend Review, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and have a great night. And a great weekend. Great weekend. Are you going to be painting this weekend?
I am going to be painting this weekend.
What are you working on?
So I've been working on for months, Brandis. I've been working
months, I tell you.
I've been working on this painting of the back of the Museum of Science and Industry, and then I read this week that they're going to be remodeling it. They're redoing it to turn it into a real entrance, which it hasn't been basically since the World's Fair.
For years, yeah.
So I have to finish it before.
What's going to happen?
So they're adding a terrace, they're adding a cafe, and again, it's going to become like a accessible entrance that people can actually use on the backside where the Jackson Park Lagoon is, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
So like if you happen to be, I don't know, strolling over from the Obama Presidential Center.
Weird how the timing of that coincides.
You can just walk on up to the door back there.
During the World's Fair, they had gondolas, so they paddle boated up to the.
Who do I talk to bring that?
You know what I'm saying?
I can't be bothered to walk.
Oh, but
I
you know
need a
what?
man in a boat.
Like when the cherry blossoms season comes, that'll be nice.
That's
gonna be beautiful.
The gondolas would be great. Would be
We're
great.
going to fit all the Cook County sheriffs deputies in the gondolas.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that serves the needs of clients in the Chicago area and throughout the nation.